What would you do if the world decided you didn't belong in a seat you had already paid for? What if strangers questioned your worth not because of your ticket, but because of your skin? On an ordinary flight to New York, one man quietly boarded first class, expecting nothing more than a few hours of peace before another long day of work. Instead, his dignity was challenged in front of hundreds of eyes. A white passenger tried to snatch his seat. Flight attendants called for his removal. Security was summoned, phones went up, live streams began, and the entire cabin braced for humiliation. But what the world didn't know was this: the man in 1A wasn't just another passenger. He was the majority owner of the very airline that tried to cast him aside. And with calm, steady words, he turned an attempted humiliation into a moment that would ignite global change. How does a single confrontation on an airplane become a movement that reshapes an entire industry? And what happens to those who tried to strip him of dignity? Stay with us until the end. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss this powerful story. Let's begin. The boarding process was almost complete. Flight attendants moved briskly through the aisle, urging passengers to stow their bags and sit down. The cabin smelled of fresh coffee, recycled air, and leather seats that had seen years of business travelers come and go. A flight bound from Los Angeles to New York, a route filled with executives, consultants, and tourists chasing the East Coast skyline. In Seat 1A, reserved for the airline's most senior executives and elite travelers, Dr. Julian Carter had just settled in. He carried only a slim leather briefcase, embossed with his initials J.C., and a cup of coffee he had grabbed at the gate. His attire was unremarkable: a plain gray hoodie, well-worn jeans, and comfortable shoes. He looked like any other tired passenger, maybe someone who had scraped together miles for a rare upgrade. Julian preferred it that way. He was used to blending in. He knew appearances deceived. And today, appearances were about to ignite a firestorm. "Get your black ass out of my seat, boy." The words landed like a slap, sharp, unmistakable. Before Julian could even respond, Rebecca Langford, a woman in her late 30s with manicured nails and a polished Chanel skirt, dug her fingers into his shoulder and yanked. Hot coffee spilled across the folded Wall Street Journal in his lap, soaking his jeans, searing his skin. His breath caught, but his expression stayed calm. She shoved him out of the seat and dropped into 1A as though claiming territory in a war. With a satisfied sigh, she smoothed her skirt, adjusted the armrest, and exhaled. "That's better," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Some people forget where they belong. Phones started to rise around the cabin. A few passengers looked away, uncomfortable, but one teenager, Maya Thompson, tapped TikTok Live and whispered, "Oh my God, everyone needs to see this." Julian stood hunched beneath the low ceiling of the first-class cabin. His hoodie and sneakers told one story. His presence told another. He held his boarding pass in one hand, the ink slightly smudged but still clear. Seat 1A. He took a slow breath. Years of meditation taught him patience. Years of executive battles taught him control. This was not the first time someone underestimated him, but this time, the stage was larger. Rebecca reclined into the leather seat with an air of triumph. Her diamond bracelet sparkled under the overhead lights as she pulled out her phone, scrolling as if she had already forgotten the man she had just humiliated. Julian studied her for a moment. He thought about his daughter, about the countless young people who looked up to him as a model of calm leadership. He thought about his employees, thousands of them across the world, who trusted him to lead with fairness and resolve. The flight doors would close in 10 minutes. All passengers must be seated, but Justice had not yet entered the cabin. A flight attendant appeared, brisk and smiling, ponytail swinging as she leaned in. Stephanie Rhodes, young, blonde, her uniform pressed to perfection, immediately assessed the scene. She saw Rebecca seated comfortably, Julian awkwardly standing in the aisle. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry about this disruption," Stephanie said warmly, laying a hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "Are you all right?" Rebecca gave a small, dramatic sigh. "I'll survive." "But this man," she gestured vaguely. "He tried to sit here." Julian extended his boarding pass politely. "This is my assigned seat, 1A. Stephanie glanced at the paper without focus, her eyes already sliding back to his hoodie, his scuffed sneakers, his dark skin. Her smile faded into sternness. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Economy class is toward the back of the aircraft." Rebecca nodded approvingly. Finally, someone with common sense. Julian's tone never wavered. "Could you please look carefully at my boarding pass, sir?" Stephanie said, lowering her voice into the register reserved for problem passengers. "Please don't make this more difficult. I'm sure your actual seat will be very comfortable." Around them, whispers grew. A businessman in 2C frowned at the scene. Maya's livestream viewer count ticked upward 500, then 800, then 1,200 comments began to flood. Why won't she check his ticket? This is discrimination. Julian inhaled deeply. Centering himself, he thought about standing his ground with fury, about demanding respect with raised voice. But he also thought about his mother's words. Power isn't how loud you shout. Power is how steady you remain when the world screams at you. Rebecca leaned back in his seat, smirking. "Look at him. Does he look like he belongs in first class? I've been flying for 15 years. I'm Diamond Medallion. I deserve this seat." Stephanie's nod was almost imperceptible, but full of meaning. "Of course, ma'am. We appreciate your loyalty." Julian's voice was steady. "I have the same loyalty status. If you could just, sir, I don't have time for games." Stephanie cut him off sharply. "Now please move so we can depart on time." Rebecca tilted her head. Smug. See, she knows the rules. Julian lowered his gaze to the ticket in his hand, then back up to Stephanie. The ink on the pass had smudged, yes, but the number was unmistakable. 1A. He had every right to be there. Inside. A quiet storm brewed. His chest tightened, not with fear but with memory. He remembered being a boy, standing outside a store where the clerk had accused him of stealing candy he never touched. He remembered professors who assumed he was the athlete, not the scholar. He remembered every slight, every dismissal, every moment he was told by the world's eyes, "You don't belong here." But now, he did belong. He belonged more than anyone in this cabin. And soon, they would know. Passengers shifted in their seats. More phones tilted toward him. The silence in first class grew heavy, thick with judgment, curiosity, and anticipation. The seconds ticked toward departure, but the real journey had not yet begun. Julian Carter straightened to his full height, his voice calm, his presence commanding, even in quiet. "I am in my assigned seat," he said, but no one yet believed him. The cabin was a living theater now. Some passengers stared in silence, unwilling to intervene. Others whispered nervously. Phones tilted upward, capturing every detail. The engines hummed faintly in the background, a reminder that time was running out. In less than 5 minutes, the doors would close. Julian Carter remained still, his back straight, his boarding pass balanced delicately between his fingers. His silence unnerved those who had already judged him guilty. They expected anger. They expected raised voices, curses, maybe even threats. What they found instead was unsettling patience. Rebecca Langford reclined deeper into seat 1A as though she had conquered a throne. Her diamond bracelet shimmered with every gesture. She scrolled her phone with the ease of someone who never expected consequences. Every movement screamed possession. This was hers now. Or so she believed. Stephanie Rhodes, the young flight attendant, glanced anxiously toward the galley. She was already imagining the report she might have to write if this man caused trouble. She told herself she was just following procedure. But in the pit of her stomach, a different truth stirred. She hadn't even looked at the ticket in his hand. She had made a decision before the evidence reached her eyes. "Sir," Stephanie said, this time sharper, "I need you to sit down in your proper seat. We are minutes from pushback." Julian tilted his head, studying her. His voice came measured, soft enough to invite reflection, strong enough to command attention. "My proper seat," he said, "is the one she is sitting in." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Maya Thompson's phone caught every word. Her live stream count climbed past 3,000. The comments scrolled in a blur. "He's calm, but you can see the power in him. Why won't they just check the pass?" "This is so wrong." Rebecca gave a theatrical laugh, sharp and cutting. "Oh, please, everyone here knows this is my seat. Do you really think they'd let someone dressed like you sit in the very first seat on this plane?" Her words hung like smoke, thick and poisonous. Julian's chest tightened, but his face remained unreadable. He remembered his mentor's words. Sometimes silence says more than fury. Let them reveal themselves. Julian, the world is watching even when you think it isn't. And the world was watching. Phones were raised higher now, recording openly. The hum of the cabin had shifted. This was no longer a simple seating dispute. This was a moral confrontation in real time. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Cabin crew, prepare doors for departure." But the doors would not close. Not yet. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Look, I'm sure you're a nice guy, but let's be real. First class isn't for everyone. Some of us have worked our whole lives for this." Julian finally spoke, his eyes never leaving hers. "So have I." For the first time. Rebecca's smirk faltered. Stephanie pressed the call button for assistance. Within seconds, the purser appeared. Anthony Green, a man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and an air of practiced authority, stepped into the aisle. He sized up the scene: quickly well-dressed white woman seated, casually dressed, black man standing, a flight attendant already tense. The calculation formed instantly in his mind, and with it, a judgment. What seems to be the problem here? His tone was calm, but laced with impatience. "This passenger refuses to sit in his assigned seat." Stephanie explained, "He's holding up our departure." Anthony looked at Julian briefly, then at Rebecca, who crossed her legs elegantly, playing the part of victim. "Sir, I'm going to need you to take your seat in economy. We cannot delay this flight." Julian extended the boarding pass again. "My seat is here." Anthony barely glanced at it. His jaw tightened. "Sir, I don't have time for games. If you don't comply, I will be forced to call airport security." The words landed like a hammer blow. Several passengers gasped. Maya's live stream counter leapt to 7,000. The comments exploded. "They didn't even read it. This is outrageous. Check the damn ticket." Rebecca smiled triumphantly. "Thank you." Finally, someone with authority. Inside. Julian's thoughts churned. He could feel the sting of humiliation, the weight of centuries pressing down on his shoulders, but he also felt something else: clarity. This was not just about him. This was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Everyone dismissed before being heard. He could not back down. Still, he remained calm. "Call them," he said simply. Anthony blinked, thrown off balance by the lack of resistance. "Excuse me, call security," Julian repeated. "I would like them to see this." The cabin grew even quieter. Passengers leaned forward in their seats. The air was thick with anticipation. Rebecca laughed again, though this time it sounded forced. "You're just embarrassing yourself now." Julian thought about his daughter's face, the way she looked up to him when he told her stories of resilience. He thought about the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on his leadership. He thought about the power of truth, quiet but unyielding. He pulled out his phone. His thumb glided across the screen, navigating menus with ease. To most passengers, it looked like a simple app. To him, it was a portal to something far greater. Anthony frowned. "Sir, whatever you're doing, stop. This isn't the time." Julian did not respond. He scrolled, tapped, entered a code. His expression never changed. Rebecca rolled her eyes. "He's probably calling his mom." The words drew a few awkward laughs from passengers who quickly silenced themselves under the weight of the moment. Julian thought about speaking, about revealing himself right then. But he paused. Timing mattered. Truth delivered too soon could be dismissed. Truth delivered at the perfect moment could never be ignored. His phone vibrated with notifications, emails, texts, urgent messages. One subject line flashed across the screenboard: meeting, rescheduled 4:00 p.m. EST. Compliance emergency. He glanced at the time. It was 3:42. Maya whispered to her phone, "Something is happening. Look at him. He's so calm. I think he knows something they don't." Her live stream count surged past 10,000. Anthony gestured to the galley. "James, Michelle, I need backup." 2 more attendants appeared. James Porter, fresh-faced and eager to prove himself, positioned himself behind Julian. Michelle Adams, a veteran with weary eyes, crossed her arms. Together with Stephanie and Anthony, they formed a wall. "Sir," Michelle said coldly, "you have 2 choices. Move to economy now, or airport police will remove you in handcuffs." The words sliced through the cabin. Handcuffs. Arrest. For daring to sit in the seat he had paid for. Julian exhaled slowly. His mother's voice echoed in his mind again. "Never let them dictate who you are. Show them who you are by refusing to bend when they expect you to break." He looked at the 4 crew members, then at Rebecca still smug in his seat, then at the rows of passengers watching in disbelief. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "I'm not moving." The cabin erupted in whispers, gasps, the frantic tapping of phones capturing history in the making. Inside, Julian's heart beat steadily. The storm was coming, but he was ready. The air in the cabin was dense now, charged with judgment, anger, and the restless hum of technology capturing every angle. Phones glowed like tiny lanterns in the dim light of the boarding cabin. The hum of the engines was steady, waiting for clearance, but no one could ignore that the real turbulence had already begun. Julian Carter stood motionless, the weight of 4 flight attendants pressing down on him with every word, every look. Rebecca Langford shifted slightly in the leather of seat 1A, her smile wide and self-satisfied, as though the verdict had already been delivered. Passengers whispered furiously. Some avoided eye contact, unwilling to risk involvement. Others craned their necks, openly engaged, their sense of justice roused by what they were witnessing. A businessman in 2C muttered under his breath, "This isn't right," while his seatmate clutched his arm and hissed for him to stay quiet. "Sir," Anthony Green repeated, his patience thinning, "this is your final warning. Take your seat in economy or security will escort you off this plane." Julian's fingers tightened slightly around his boarding pass. His eyes, calm and unwavering, met Anthony's. "My assigned seat," he said, "is the one she's sitting in." The statement wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Maya Thompson's phone caught every syllable, her live stream comment counter exploding. He's so calm. He's holding his ground. This is history unfolding. Rebecca gave a sharp laugh, trying to puncture the moment with mockery. Oh, give it up already. You're embarrassing yourself. This seat isn't yours. It never was. Julian turned his gaze toward her. He studied her face, the smug tilt of her chin, the arrogance of someone who had never been told no in her life. For a fleeting second, anger flared inside him. The years of being underestimated, the countless rooms where he was the only black man at the table, the dismissals, the polite but cutting comments, all of it threatened to surge forward, but he drew in a deep breath. Not here. Not like this. His silence was louder than Rebecca's taunts. Stephanie Rhodes shifted uneasily, the certainty she had felt moments ago beginning to falter. She hadn't looked at the ticket, not really. But what if she was wrong? What if this man was telling the truth? Yet the fear of admitting a mistake pressed hard against her chest. Better to double down than to face humiliation in front of passengers. Michelle Adams crossed her arms tighter, her voice brittle with authority. Sir, this is not a debate. Follow instructions or face consequences. Julian's eyes narrowed, his thoughts racing. He weighed his options. He could reveal himself now, pull back the curtain, shock them into silence. But something inside him urged patience. Let them continue. Let the world see the assumptions in their rawest form. If he revealed too soon, it might look staged, controlled. But if he waited, if he let their prejudice spill into the open, the evidence would be undeniable. The plane's PA system chimed. Cabin crew, cross-check doors for departure. The irony was thick. There would be no departure until this conflict resolved. Rebecca stretched in the seat as though she owned it. Honestly, this is pathetic. I fly every week. I know how these things work. People like you should just be grateful for economy. A murmur of disapproval swept through the cabin. A woman in 3A shook her head in disbelief. The businessman in 2C muttered louder this time. She didn't just say that, Maya whispered into her phone. Did you hear that people like you? This is blatant. It's right here on camera. Her live stream count soared past 20,000. Comments poured in, expose her. Don't let this go. We're with him. Julian's heart pounded steadily, but his face betrayed nothing. Inside, a storm raged. He thought of his late father, a man who had once been dragged from a whites-only diner decades earlier, humiliated but unbroken. His father had told him once, "Son, one day you'll be in a position where you can turn that humiliation into power. Don't squander it. Stand tall." The memory anchored him now. He raised his boarding pass higher, the smudged ink still legible. This says 1A. Do you see it? His voice was calm but firm, directed at Anthony. Anthony barely looked. I see a smudge. Could be anything. Oh, for all I know, you switched tickets with someone. Julian inhaled sharply. The dismissal was expected, yet it pierced deeply. His ticket, his proof, was treated as worthless in their eyes. Rebecca's voice sliced through. Stop wasting their time. Security will deal with you. And then the words that would shift everything. Call them, Julian said again, steady as stone. Anthony hesitated, then nodded toward Stephanie. Fine. Call them in. Stephanie lifted the phone, her hand trembling slightly, and requested assistance. Within moments, the announcement went out: security requested at gate for passenger dispute. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. The idea of a man being dragged off in handcuffs for insisting on his seat unsettled many. Some whispered openly now, voicing what others were too afraid to say. This is racism. They didn't even check his ticket. Unbelievable. Maya's phone caught it all. Her live stream comments screamed agreement. The digital world was watching with fire in its eyes. Julian closed his own eyes briefly, steadying his breath. He imagined his daughter again, her soft voice asking once, "Daddy, why do people sometimes treat us differently?" He had answered then, "Because they don't know who we really are. But one day, you'll show them by standing firm." That day was today. Rebecca leaned back, smug once more. Finally, he'll be gone. We can all get on with our flight in peace. But peace was not what waited for her. Through the glass of the jet bridge, two figures approached a black officer with broad shoulders and calm eyes, and a Latina officer with a sharp gaze that missed nothing. They entered the cabin with quiet authority, Officer Daniel Brooks and Officer Carla Ruiz. The passengers watched silently as they stepped into first class. Phones lifted higher. The atmosphere shifted again. The stakes had risen. "Who called for security?" Brooks asked, his voice steady. Anthony gestured quickly. "That man is refusing to take his proper seat. He's holding us up." Brooks turned to Julian, his expression neutral. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Julian handed it over without hesitation. Rebecca scoffed loudly. "Don't waste your time. He doesn't belong here." Carla Ruiz frowned at the interruption, then glanced at the pass, reading carefully. Her eyes flicked to Brooks, then back to the smudged but clear print. Seat 1A. The cabin held its breath. Julian stood tall, silent, waiting. The storm was nearly here. Officer Daniel Brooks studied the boarding pass carefully, his eyes narrowing as he confirmed the seat number. He was thorough, deliberate, not swayed by appearance. His partner, Officer Carla Ruiz, watched the situation with the kind of sharp focus that comes from years of dealing with messy conflicts. "Seat 1A, Brooks said finally, his voice even. "That's what it says right here." A hush fell over the cabin. For the first time, doubt flickered across Stephanie Rhodes's face. Michelle Adams shifted uncomfortably, arms still crossed but her confidence less certain. James Porter avoided eye contact altogether. Rebecca Langford laughed, loud and brittle. "Oh, come on. You're really going to take his word for it? Look at him. Do you honestly believe he belongs in the very first seat of this plane?" Her words cut the air like a knife. Some passengers winced. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Maya Thompson's phone captured it all, her live stream now topping 30,000 viewers. The comments scrolled in a blur. "She just said that out loud. This is insane. He clearly has the ticket. Why are they still doubting him?" Brooks's jaw tightened. He had heard this tone before, this dismissive cruelty dressed as certainty. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "the boarding pass shows seat 1A. Until I hear otherwise from the gate, I have no reason to believe it's fraudulent." Rebecca rolled her eyes dramatically. "You don't get it, do you? I'm Diamond Elite. I know how this works. People like him, they cheat the system. They always do." Julian Carter closed his eyes briefly, steadying the storm rising within him. Each insult pressed against the dam of his patience. Each word dragged him closer to unleashing the anger that burned in his chest. But he couldn't give them that. Not now. Not ever. His thoughts raced. He imagined his daughter scrolling TikTok, stumbling onto Maya's live stream, watching her father being belittled, degraded, accused of fraud. The thought stabbed at him, but it also gave him clarity. He had to endure this with dignity. He had to model strength, not fury. Carla Ruiz stepped forward, cutting into the tension. "Let's get confirmation from the manifest. Anthony, do you have a passenger list?" Anthony Green hesitated. His instinct was to shield his crew, to stand with the customer he assumed was right. But the scrutiny in Ruiz's eyes forced him into motion. He tapped his tablet, scrolling quickly. Julian waited, silent, every second stretching long and heavy. His inner voice whispered, "Patience. The truth is inevitable. Let them expose themselves. The more they push, the clearer the world will see. Anthony's brow furrowed. He scrolled again, then again, his lips pressed thin. The screen told him what he did not want to admit. Seat 1A. Carter. Julian. The cabin exhaled as one. Passengers murmured, some in relief, others in disbelief. Maya whispered into her phone, "It's his seat." It was always his seat. Her viewer count rocketed past 50,000, but Rebecca wasn't done. "This is ridiculous. He must have stolen it." "There's no way, ma'am," Brooks interrupted firmly. "That's enough." Rebecca's face flushed red. "Excuse me, do you know who I am?" "Yes," Brooks replied. "You're a passenger in violation of federal aviation law by occupying a seat that isn't yours. You're also disrupting the cabin." Gasps rippled through the aisle. For the first time, Rebecca's confidence wavered. Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. Julian remained silent, his eyes on Brooks. Gratitude flickered in his chest, but he knew this wasn't over. The crew wouldn't back down so easily. Stephanie stepped forward, her voice rising with forced authority. "Officer, with all due respect, we have to prioritize safety. This man's behavior has been disruptive. He's delaying our departure." Julian spoke for the first time in minutes, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Disruptive. I've been standing here with my boarding pass while your crew refused to read it." Passengers nodded, some murmuring agreement. A woman in 3A raised her phone higher, her recording capturing every angle. Michelle Adams scowled. "We can't have passengers challenging crew authority. If we allow that, we lose control." Brooks turned to her slowly. "Authority doesn't mean ignoring evidence. Authority means enforcing the truth." The words hung heavy. Even Carla Ruiz tilted her head, impressed. Julian's thoughts swirled. Should he reveal himself now? Should he end this charade with the truth of who he was? He imagined the faces of these attendants when they learned the man they had humiliated wasn't just a passenger, but the owner of the airline. Part of him longed to see their shock, their regret, but another part whispered caution. Timing mattered. Rebecca finally stood, her composure fraying. "You people are unbelievable, and I'm not moving. If he wants this seat so badly, he can fight me for it." Julian inhaled sharply. The temptation to respond, to unleash everything he carried, was fierce, but again he chose stillness. "Officer Brooks," Ruiz said firmly, "escort this passenger to her assigned seat." Rebecca froze. "You can't be serious." Brooks's eyes hardened. "Ma'am, if you don't comply, you'll be removed from the aircraft entirely." Gasps filled the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, the tide turning. Some clapped quietly. Maya's live stream erupted with comments. "Finally, justice. She's losing it." But before Brooks could move, Anthony Green raised a hand. "Wait, if we escalate this, the entire flight will be delayed. Maybe the gentleman can accept another seat in first class as a compromise." Julian turned his gaze on Anthony. Calm but piercing. "You want me to give up my seat because confronting bias makes you uncomfortable?" Anthony flinched but said nothing. The cabin was electric, the silence a drumbeat of anticipation. Julian's thoughts churned again. He wanted to end it here, to reveal his identity, to crush their arrogance with truth. But no, not yet. They hadn't learned enough. They hadn't seen enough. Rebecca folded her arms, still refusing. "I'm not moving. You can't make me." Carla Ruiz's voice was ice. "Try me." The tension snapped tight like a wire. One wrong word, one sudden move, and the cabin could erupt. Julian felt the weight of it pressing down, the injustice, the arrogance, the refusal to acknowledge reality. Inside him, the quiet storm raged. But outside, he was stone. He thought again of his daughter's question, "Why do people treat us differently?" His answer whispered silently now, so we can show them who we really are. He stayed silent, his dignity intact, his resolve unbroken. The reckoning was near. For a long moment, the only sounds inside the first-class cabin were the faint hum of the engines and the heavy breathing of people caught in conflict. Rebecca Langford clutched the armrest of seat 1A as if holding on to a throne. Julian Carter remained standing, tall, still, unshaken. Officer Brooks held the boarding pass in his hand, a quiet confirmation of the truth. Then, slowly, voices began to rise from the surrounding rows. "This isn't right," said the man in 2C, his voice loud enough for others to hear. We all saw him show the pass. "That's his seat." His seatmate tugged at his sleeve nervously. "Don't get involved, Martin. Just let them deal with it." But Martin shook his head. "No, I can't just sit here and watch." A woman in 3A raised her phone higher. "I'm recording everything. If they drag him off, the whole world will know." The words were like a spark in dry grass. Murmurs spread through the cabin. People leaned out of their seats, whispering, some shaking their heads in disgust. A few clapped softly in agreement. The tide was turning. Rebecca shot a glare toward the passengers. "Mind your own business. This doesn't concern you." But it did. Maya Thompson's live stream had exploded past 70,000 viewers. The comments flooded like a river in storm season. "We see you. Stand your ground. This is racism on full display. Don't let them silence you." Some viewers began tagging major news outlets. Others promised to forward the stream to civil rights organizations. The digital world was awake now, and it was roaring. Julian felt the shift in the air. His heart pounded, but not from fear, from recognition. This was bigger than him now. He was no longer standing alone. The witnesses had found their voices, and the world beyond the cabin was demanding justice. Officer Brooks looked around, his calm composure hiding the calculation in his mind. He knew how fast situations like this could spiral. "Everyone, stay calm," he said firmly. "We're handling it." But his reassurance couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. The passengers had seen enough. Michelle Adams, her arms crossed tighter than before, muttered, "Passengers should stay out of crew decisions." A woman in 4B responded instantly. "Crew decisions. You ignored his ticket. You treated him like he was lying before you even checked. That's not procedure, that's bias." Stephanie Rhodes flinched. She felt the sting of truth, but didn't dare admit it. The fear of admitting fault twisted her insides. Rebecca slammed her phone onto the tray table. "This is ridiculous. I don't care what the ticket says. People like him don't belong in this seat." "I've worked too hard to—" The words were cut off by gasps. Phones lifted higher. Passengers murmured angrily. Someone shouted, "Say that again." Rebecca's face flushed red, but she didn't repeat it. She didn't need to. Everyone had heard. Julian stood still, his jaw tightening. Inside, a war raged. He wanted to respond, to shout, to demand respect, but he remembered his father's lesson. Power is not how loud you are. Power is how steady you remain when others lose control. He breathed deeply and let the silence speak for him. Maya whispered into her phone, "Did you hear that? Everyone heard it. This is bigger than one seat. This is racism live on camera." Her live stream counter shot past 100,000. Rebecca turned back toward Julian, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can just stand there and make us all wait. You think your silence makes you dignified. It makes you look guilty." Julian finally spoke, his words measured, every syllable cutting through the cabin. "My silence doesn't make me guilty. It makes you louder. And the louder you get, the clearer the truth becomes." The cabin froze. The weight of his words settled heavy in the air. Even Rebecca faltered, her lips parting without a comeback. Anthony Green, the purser, rubbed his temple, his authority crumbling under the weight of the moment. He whispered to Stephanie. "We're losing control," Stephanie whispered back. "We never had it." Officer Carla Ruiz stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Enough. This has gone on too long. Ma'am, return to your assigned seat now, or I'll remove you myself." Rebecca's mouth opened to protest, but before she could speak, Martin and 2C stood. "Officer, with all due respect, if she doesn't move, then she should be the one taken off this plane, not him." Applause broke out, first scattered, then stronger. Passengers clapped, some cheered. The sound filled the cabin, a chorus of defiance against injustice. Rebecca froze in disbelief. "You're all siding with him. You don't even know who he is." Julian's heart pounded. For a brief moment, he considered revealing it right then. His thumb hovered near the app on his phone that would show his ownership of the airline. He could end it in an instant. But something held him back. Not yet. Let them drown in their arrogance a little longer. Let the world see it fully before the curtain dropped. He looked at Rebecca, then at the crew, then at the sea of faces turned toward him with expectation. His voice was soft but clear. "You don't need to know who I am. You just need to know I paid for this seat, and I have the right to sit in it." The applause grew louder. Phones captured every second. The live stream comments roared. King energy, calm power, dignity on display. Rebecca's hands trembled, but she tightened her grip on the armrest. "I'm not moving," she hissed. Brooks shook his head. "Ma'am, you are out of options. You either move now, or we escort you off this aircraft." The tension was a wire ready to snap. Passengers leaned forward, breathless, waiting. The live stream count hit 150,000. Julian's thoughts swirled. His patience was strong, but his heart ached. He thought of his daughter again, of the world she was growing up in. He thought of the young boy who had once been shoved out of a diner by police for no reason. He thought of the men and women who had endured worse so that he could stand here today. He felt their strength in his bones. Rebecca's eyes darted around the cabin, searching for allies, but finding none. Even Stephanie avoided her gaze now. The power she had wielded so casually only minutes ago was slipping through her fingers. Still, she spat the words, desperate to cling to her illusion of control. "Fine. If you want me gone, you'll have to drag me out." The cabin erupted in gasps. Phones tilted higher. The live stream counter surged again. Julian closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered to himself, "The storm is almost here." The cabin trembled with tension that no turbulence could match. The flight attendants had lost the crowd. Rebecca Langford's arrogance clung to the leather of seat 1A like a stain, but her words had turned passengers against her. Phones hovered in the air, recording, streaming, amplifying. The whole world was tuned in now. Officer Carla Ruiz stepped closer, her stance firm, her voice sharp. "Ma'am, this is your last warning. Return to your assigned seat immediately." Rebecca crossed her arms defiantly. "No, I'm not moving. He doesn't belong here. You don't know who I am." A wave of disgust rippled through the cabin. Murmurs filled the air, louder now, emboldened by numbers. Martin and 2C muttered, "We know exactly who you are, and we're done with people like you." Applause broke out again, stronger this time. Rebecca's cheeks flushed crimson, her chest rising and falling quickly. She scanned the faces around her, looking for a single ally, but even the crew avoided her gaze. Julian Carter stood silent, his posture regal in its calm. Inside, though, a storm raged. His heart beat like a drum in his chest. He could end this, now reveal his ownership, silence them with undeniable authority. But something inside urged restraint. Let the arrogance burn itself out. Let the witnesses and the thousands watching online see the truth before he spoke it aloud. Officer Daniel Brooks adjusted his stance. His patience was thinning. "Ma'am, if you continue to refuse, we will escort you off this aircraft in restraints." Gasps filled the cabin. The words hung like a guillotine, handcuffs. The image alone shifted the balance of power. Rebecca's voice cracked as she tried to hold her ground. "You wouldn't dare." Carla's eyes narrowed. "Try us." The passengers murmured again, some cheering softly, others gasping at the escalation. Maya Thompson whispered into her phone, "She's done. She's cornered." But look at him. He's still so calm. He hasn't raised his voice once. Her live stream comments poured in faster than she could read them. This man is incredible. Dignity under fire. The officers are with him. She's finished. Julian's mind flashed with memories. His first business deal where a banker had asked him to bring his real boss. The hotel lobby where he'd been mistaken for a porter in his own building. The countless times people had looked at him and decided he didn't belong. This moment was all of them, compressed into one crucible of truth. And yet, he remained still. Michelle Adams broke the silence, her arms crossed like armor. "We can't delay the flight any longer. Officers, just remove him and be done with it." Her words drew a fresh wave of outrage from passengers. A woman in 3A shot back, "Remove him. He's the one with the ticket. We all saw it." Martin added, louder this time, "If you remove him, you'll have to remove all of us too." Shouts of agreement echoed from the rows. A man in 4D raised his voice. "This is America. You don't get to bully someone out of their rights." Phones caught every moment, every cheer, every declaration. Maya's live stream count soared past 200,000. The cabin was no longer just a cabin. It was a courtroom, a theater, a battlefield. Rebecca slammed her palm on the armrest. "You people don't understand. I've worked hard for my status. I deserve this seat." Julian finally turned his eyes to her, steady and piercing. His voice was calm, but it resonated through the cabin. "You think status buys dignity, but dignity isn't for sale. It's a birthright, and no one gets to decide who deserves it." The words silenced the cabin. Even Rebecca's lips trembled, her retort lost in the weight of what he'd said. Maya whispered into her phone, "Did you hear that dignity isn't for sale?" That's the line. That's history. The applause came again, thunderous this time. Passengers clapped. Some even stood in their rows, their cheers filling the cabin with a force no authority could suppress. Julian's chest swelled, not with pride, but with purpose. He thought of his daughter again, of the world she would inherit. He thought of the men and women who had walked before him, who had borne heavier burdens so that he could stand here today. Their voices lived inside him, guiding him. Anthony Green, the purser, rubbed his forehead, sweat beading near his hairline. His authority was gone, stripped away by truth and witness. He whispered to Stephanie, "If this goes viral, we're finished." Stephanie's voice shook. It already has. Rebecca, cornered and desperate, raised her voice one last time. "You'll regret this, all of you, especially him." Julian's eyes met hers, calm, unyielding. "No, the only regret in this cabin will be yours." The crowd gasped again. The balance of power had shifted fully now. Rebecca no longer held the seat. She sat in it, yes, but she didn't own the moment. The moment belonged to Julian, to the passengers, to the truth. Officer Brooks cleared his throat. His decision, final. "Ma'am, you have 10 seconds to move. If you do not, we will remove you." The countdown began in silence. 10, 9, 8. The cabin held its breath. Phones zoomed in. Maya whispered into her phone. "This is it. This is the breaking point. 7, 6, 5. Rebecca's eyes darted around, desperate for an escape, but none came. 4, 3. Her voice cracked, trembling. "Fine, fine. I'll move. But this isn't over." The cheers erupted like a wave crashing against the shore. Passengers clapped, some whistled, some shouted. Maya's phone shook in her hand as she tried to capture it all. Her live stream comments exploded. "She's out. Justice wins. Look at him, still calm, still strong." Rebecca stood, her body rigid, her pride shattered. She gathered her bag and stalked toward her assigned seat, her eyes burning with humiliation. Phones followed her every step, capturing her fall from arrogance to defeat. Julian remained standing, silent, steady. The storm had broken, but the skies were not yet clear. The real reckoning was still to come. He inhaled slowly, his mind whispering, "Not yet. The time to reveal is near, but not yet." He lowered himself into seat 1A at last, the seat he had paid for, the seat he had earned, the seat that was his. The passengers clapped again, their cheers washing over him, but inside, Julian knew this was only the beginning. The world was watching, and soon, the truth of who he was would change everything. The cheers that filled the cabin after Rebecca Langford finally abandoned seat 1A rolled like thunder. Applause echoed through the first-class cabin, a sound more powerful than any announcement over the intercom. Julian Carter sat down at last, sliding into the seat that had always been his. The leather felt cool against his back, but his body carried the heat of everything that had just unfolded. The passengers' claps slowly subsided, replaced by a tense quiet. Everyone knew the storm wasn't over. Not yet. Rebecca sat several rows back now, rigid in her new seat, her eyes burning holes into Julian's back. She tapped furiously at her phone, no doubt drafting some narrative where she was the victim. Stephanie Rhodes hovered in the galley, her posture stiff, her eyes darting nervously to Anthony Green. Michelle Adams kept her arms crossed, still glaring at Julian as though he were the one at fault. Anthony rubbed his forehead, whispering to Stephanie, "We've lost control of this. If he takes this to corporate, we're finished." Stephanie's voice trembled. "Do you think he will?" Anthony sighed, his gut tightening. Men like him don't let things go. They didn't know how right he was. Julian sat silently, his phone resting on the tray table in front of him. Notifications buzzed like a hive of bees, messages pouring in, executives, lawyers, PR teams. His company knew something was happening. The board knew. The world knew. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He thought of his daughter again, of the responsibility he carried, not just as a father, but as a leader. His silence had been his shield. But now, the time for silence was ending. Officer Brooks stood near the aisle, his eyes scanning the cabin. "Everything under control here?" he asked firmly. Anthony tried to seize back authority. "Yes, officer will handle it from here." "Thank you." But Brooks wasn't convinced. "With respect, you weren't handling it before." Passengers chuckled and murmured approval. Maya Thompson whispered into her phone. He said it. He called them out. Her live stream count ticked toward 300,000. Julian leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice carried, low and steady. "No, Officer Brooks, it isn't under control. Not yet." The cabin quieted instantly. All eyes turned toward him. Anthony bristled. "Sir, we've already resolved this. Please sit back and let us proceed with departure." Julian's gaze cut through him. "Resolved. You ignored my ticket. You called for my removal. You humiliated me in front of this cabin, and you call that resolved." A wave of murmurs rippled through the rows. Passengers nodded, whispered, Agreed. Julian's hand moved to his phone. He opened an app that few in the world had access to. The screen lit up with the logo of the airline itself. He tapped a code, one only the board of directors possessed. A dashboard appeared: ownership percentages, voting rights, executive privileges, and at the top, in bold print, Julian Carter, majority owner, 64%. Gasps echoed as passengers leaned closer, their eyes widening. Maya's phone zoomed in, capturing the glow of the screen. Her live stream chat exploded. No way. He owns the airline. He's the boss. The entire crew is done for. Anthony's jaw dropped. This isn't possible. Julian's eyes never wavered. It's not only possible, it's true. I don't just belong in this seat. I own this airline. The words landed like an earthquake. The cabin erupted. Some passengers cheered, others gasped loudly. Phones shook as people tried to capture the moment. Rebecca's voice shrieked from the back, "He's lying. That's fake. There's no way." But Brooks turned toward her, his expression firm. "It's real. I've seen enough of these systems to know what I'm looking at." Carla Ruiz folded her arms, satisfied. Well, that explains his patience. Stephanie staggered backward, her face pale. You're the owner." Julian's voice was steady, calm, controlled. "Yes. And today, you showed me exactly how my customers are treated when you think no one is watching." Passengers broke into applause again, louder this time, a wave of vindication filling the air. Maya's live stream surged past 400,000 viewers. The comments screamed with fire exposed, "Game over, history made." Michelle Adams stammered, We didn't know." If we had known Julian cut her off, his tone sharp for the first time. "That's the problem. You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with dignity." Silence swallowed the cabin. His words hung heavy, undeniable. Some passengers had tears in their eyes. Others clapped slowly, reverently. Julian leaned back slightly, his voice quieter but no less powerful. "The problem isn't that you didn't know I was the CEO. The problem is that you didn't see me as a human being." The silence deepened, raw and painful. Rebecca fidgeted in her seat, her face red with rage. Stephanie's eyes brimmed with tears. She quickly blinked away. Anthony stood frozen, his authority shattered, his career slipping through his fingers. Julian glanced around the cabin, making eye contact with passengers, witnesses, allies. His heart swelled with the gravity of the moment. He thought of his daughter, of the future, of the weight of responsibility that came with his power. He spoke again, each word deliberate. "You all thought this was about a seat. But it was never about a seat. It was about dignity. And dignity is not for sale." The cabin erupted once more in thunderous applause. Passengers rose from their seats, clapping, cheering, some even shouting his name. Phones shook as they streamed the moment live to the world. Maya whispered into her phone, her voice trembling. "This is history. He just said it. Dignity is not for sale. This will change everything." Julian leaned back in 1A, finally seated, finally at peace. But he knew this was just the beginning. The reckoning had only started. The roar of applause thundered through the cabin, louder than the engines idling on the runway. Passengers clapped until their palms stung, some even whistling, others shouting in vindication. Julian Carter sat in seat 1A, calm but firm, letting the storm of recognition wash over him. For the first time, the cabin crew seemed small. Anthony Green, once so commanding, stood stiff and pale, sweat glistening along his hairline. Stephanie Rhodes looked down at the carpet as if she wished it would swallow her. Michelle Adams' arms remained crossed, but her eyes flicked nervously around the cabin, no longer certain of her ground. Rebecca Langford exploded from her seat several rows back. This is ridiculous. He's lying. He faked that screen. I've flown this airline for years, and I've never heard his name. Her shrill voice cracked with desperation. Phones turned toward her, recording her unraveling. Passengers booed. Some shouted for her to sit down. A man in 4D yelled, "You're finished." Lady Rebecca clutched her handbag like a shield, her eyes darting wildly. "You're all sheep. You believe everything you see on a screen." Julian rose slowly, his composure unshaken. His voice cut through the noise, steady and commanding. "Rebecca, every second you speak, you prove my point. You don't need to believe me. The truth is bigger than your disbelief." Gasps echoed again. Passengers cheered louder, their support overwhelming her protests. Maya Thompson whispered into her phone, her voice trembling with excitement. "He's dismantling her with calm. Do you hear this? Over 500,000 watching right now." Rebecca tried again, her words stumbling. "You can't treat me like this." "I'm Diamond Elite Officer Carla Ruiz," stepped forward, her hand raised. "Enough. Sit down before we escort you out. Final warning." Rebecca froze. For the first time, she realized her privilege carried no weight here. Her lip trembled as she sank into her seat, the fire in her eyes replaced with fear. Phones captured every second, sealing her downfall forever. Julian turned his gaze back to the crew. "You doubted me. You dismissed me. You threatened me with handcuffs for insisting on what was rightfully mine." His eyes lingered on Anthony. "You looked at me and decided I didn't belong here." Anthony swallowed hard. His voice was faint. "Sir, I didn't know who you were." Julian's reply was sharp, yet calm. "That's the tragedy. You didn't need to know who I was. You just needed to treat me with respect. And you failed." Passengers murmured in agreement. A woman in 3A called out, "Say it louder," and cheers followed. Stephanie's hands shook as she wrung them together. We made a mistake." Julian tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "No. A mistake is dropping a tray of drinks. What you did was a choice, and choices have consequences." The silence that followed was heavier than the applause had been. The crew shifted uncomfortably, the truth undeniable. Then Julian tapped his phone. A direct line opened, a secured channel that only a handful of people in the world could access. Within seconds, the call connected to the airline's headquarters. A polished voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Carter, we've been monitoring the live streams. The board is in emergency session." "How do you wish to proceed?" Gasps filled the cabin again. Passengers leaned forward, phones angled to capture every word. Maya whispered to her phone, "This is happening live. He's talking to HQ right now." Julian's voice was even, deliberate. "Proceed by removing the crew members who failed their duty. Effective immediately." Anthony's knees nearly buckled. "Sir, please, don't do this." Julian's eyes were ice. "Don't beg me now. You should have thought of this before you called for my arrest." Stephanie stammered. I'm sorry. I didn't mean." Julian cut her off. "You didn't mean to get caught." The cabin erupted in murmurs again. Passengers nodding, whispering, recording every second. The polished voice from HQ responded firmly. "Understood, Mr. Carter. Consider it done." Phones exploded with notifications as news outlets began pushing alerts. Airline CEO exposed on flight. Discrimination livestream goes viral. Crew fired in real time. Julian closed his phone, placing it calmly on the tray table. His voice was softer now, but it carried weight. "This isn't just about me. It's about every passenger who's been humiliated, ignored, or dismissed because someone decided they didn't belong. That ends today." The passengers clapped again, many standing in solidarity. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Maya's live stream counter ticked over 700,000. The comments, a flood of solidarity. History made. Never forget this moment. Dignity wins, Michelle Adams whispered, almost to herself. I've worked 20 years for this airline. Julian's gaze settled on her. And in 20 years, how many passengers did you dismiss the same way you dismissed me today? Michelle's lips parted, but no words came. Her silence was damning. Rebecca slammed her palm on her tray table one last time. You all think he's some kind of hero, but he humiliated me. I should sue. Passengers booed loudly. Someone shouted, "Sue yourself!" Laughter erupted, drowning her out. Rebecca shrank in her seat, her arrogance finally collapsing under the weight of collective condemnation. Julian leaned back into 1A, his eyes closing for a moment. His thoughts drifted inward. He imagined his daughter watching the viral streams, seeing her father stand tall in the face of prejudice. He imagined her pride, her strength growing from his example. He thought of his late father again, hearing his voice whisper, "You carried it well. Son, you carried it better than I ever could." He opened his eyes, his resolve sharper than ever. The fallout was just beginning. The cabin had witnessed justice in real time. The world outside would demand more. Officer Brooks nodded toward Julian, respect in his eyes. "Mr. Carter, what do you want us to do now?" Julian's voice was steady. "Do nothing. The world has already seen enough. Let the truth do its work." The passengers erupted once more in applause, not just for the man in 1A, but for the lesson that had unfolded before them. And for the first time that day, Julian allowed himself a small smile, not of triumph, but of certainty. The reckoning had begun, and nothing could stop it now. The applause still reverberated inside the cabin, but beyond those narrow walls, the story was already spreading like wildfire. Every passenger with a phone had shared their recordings. Maya Thompson's live stream had surged past 1 million viewers, her comment feed blurring faster than her eyes could follow. Cable news stations were breaking into programming with the headline, "Airline CEO Confronts Racism, Onboard Livestream Goes Viral." Inside the corporate tower downtown, the airline's executive board scrambled. Screens in the crisis room displayed split feeds, cable anchors dissecting the incident, Twitter hashtags trending worldwide, and Maya's live stream climbing toward 2 million live watchers. Patricia Monroe, the airline's chief operating officer, paced the room, her heels clicking against polished floors. "How did this happen on our flagship route?" she demanded, her voice sharp with panic. Beside her, HR Director Alan Pierce scrolled through his phone. Pale. "It's everywhere already. We've had over 10,000 calls in the past half hour. Journalists, activists, shareholders. Everyone wants answers. The General Counsel." Mariah Diaz pressed her hands together, her voice measured but urgent. "Legally, we're exposed. Wrongful removal threats, discriminatory conduct, reputational damage. This could trigger a federal review." The Chief Communications Officer, Raymond Ellis, muttered, "Trigger it already has. The FAA just left a voicemail. They're monitoring." The COO's eyes snapped to the screen where Julian Carter sat calmly in 1A, his phone on the tray table, his posture regal. She exhaled sharply. "He told us he'd do periodic audits. He warned us, and we dismissed it." Back on the aircraft, the tension had softened into awe. Passengers whispered, some recording heartfelt monologues about what they had just witnessed. "I'll never forget this," said the man in 2C, speaking into his phone. He showed the world that dignity isn't negotiable. Rebecca Langford, still fuming in her new seat, tapped frantically on her phone, drafting a message to her lawyer. But the world was not on her side. Already, hashtags had emerged. Dignity not for sale, Seat 1A, and Carter Airlines. Her own name trended too, attached to clips of her arrogance. The internet was merciless. Julian remained still, though his mind raced. He imagined the board scrambling, lawyers in panic, comms executives trying to shape the narrative. He imagined shareholders watching their stock dip in real time. And through it all, he kept his breathing steady. Officer Daniel Brooks leaned closer. "Mr. Carter, do you want us to remove the crew now?" Julian shook his head slowly. "Not yet. Let them sit in what they've done. Let the weight of silence teach them more than removal ever could." Brooks nodded respectfully. Maya whispered into her phone, "Do you hear that he's not even rushing revenge? He's letting them learn." Her live stream counter ticked higher. The comments poured, "That's leadership. Calm power. He's teaching them." Back at headquarters, the board meeting was in chaos. Patricia Monroe slammed a binder onto the table. "We need a public apology drafted immediately. No legal jargon, human, transparent." Raymond Ellis nodded quickly. "I'll start. We'll need a video statement from the CEO himself." He froze, realizing, except the CEO is already on camera, live, exposing us. The room groaned. Mariah Diaz pinched the bridge of her nose. Then we pivot. Frame this as a reckoning. We don't fight it, we embrace it. Immediate suspension of involved staff. Public reforms, commitments to DEI, training overhaul. Alan Pierce stammered, "That'll take months." "Then make it weeks," Patricia snapped, "or we won't have an airline left to reform." On board, the energy had shifted entirely. Passengers were not merely witnesses anymore. They were participants in a movement unfolding in real time. A woman in 3A leaned into her camera. "To anyone watching this isn't just about one man. It's about how we treat people every day. I saw it with my own eyes." Julian heard her words and let them settle. He thought again of his daughter, of her wide eyes, of the lessons she would one day carry. He whispered under his breath, too soft for anyone else to hear. "This is for you," Rebecca hissed suddenly from her row. "You're all fools. This won't last. People will forget." Julian turned slightly, his gaze steady. The internet doesn't forget, and neither will history. The passengers erupted in cheers again. At that exact moment, in the corporate tower, the chief financial officer reported grim numbers. "Shares are down 14% in the last 30 minutes. We're bleeding value by the second." Patricia Monroe clenched her jaw. "Then we go nuclear. Launch the Carter Protocol. Roll out every safeguard we've drafted but never implemented. Bias training, anonymous reporting, body cams for crew, effective immediately." Alan Pierce paled. "We can't Patricia cut him off. We don't have a choice. He owns us. And right now, the world does too." The boardroom fell silent, the gravity sinking in on the aircraft. Julian finally reached for his phone again. He scrolled through his messages, finding one from his daughter, a single line. "Daddy, I'm watching. I'm proud." His eyes stung, but he held steady. He straightened his posture, looked across the cabin, and spoke once more. "Today, this airline begins a new chapter, not because I said so, because all of you demanded it." The passengers clapped again, some standing in ovation. Phones shook as the internet roared its agreement. Julian closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breath. He knew the days ahead would be grueling press conferences, lawsuits, reforms, perhaps resignations. But he also knew the tide had turned, and he had guided it with patience, dignity, and truth. The fallout was messy, global, unstoppable, but it was also the beginning of something greater. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the captain announced, voice trembling, "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience." Julian smiled faintly. Patience, he murmured to himself, has power. And for the first time that day, the engines roared not in anger, but in assent. When the wheels touched down on the runway, a ripple of anticipation passed through the cabin. The engines roared as the aircraft slowed, the familiar jolt pressing passengers back into their seats. But this landing was unlike any other. Everyone knew it. This wasn't just the end of a flight, it was the beginning of a reckoning. Passengers pulled out their phones again, ready to capture every second. Maya Thompson whispered into hers, her live stream now past 2 million concurrent viewers. We're about to see history. I don't know what's going to happen when the doors open, but the world is watching. Rebecca Langford sat stiff in her seat, clutching her handbag, her eyes darting nervously. She had gone quiet now, her earlier arrogance drained by the weight of exposure. Every few seconds, she peeked at her phone, scrolling through a tidal wave of notifications. Her name was trending worldwide, attached to clips of her sneering, her accusations, her entitlement. There would be no escape. The flight attendants remained pale and silent. Anthony Green tugged at his collar, sweat dampening his shirt. Stephanie Rhodes twisted her fingers together, her lips pressed tight. Michelle Adams sat rigid, her jaw clenched, staring straight ahead as if willing herself invisible. James Porter kept his head down, the youngest among them, his silence both shame and survival. Officer Daniel Brooks leaned closer to Julian Carter. "Mr. Carter, there will be press waiting outside. Do you want an escort through the crowd?" Julian's voice was calm, even, "No. I'll walk through like every other passenger. Let them see me as I am. No shield, no barriers." Brooks nodded, respect clear in his eyes. The captain's voice broke over the intercom, hesitant but clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop. On behalf of the airline, I apologize for any inconvenience during this flight." The word inconvenience landed awkwardly. Passengers muttered, some scoffed, others shook their heads. Julian didn't react. He knew the captain was trapped between duty and damage control. The real words would come later. The aircraft rolled to a stop at the gate. From the windows, flashing lights reflected off the fuselage cameras, police cars, news vans. A swarm of journalists and activists crowded the jet bridge, their lenses and microphones ready. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Passengers surged to their feet, phones lifted high. Maya whispered into her stream, "It's happening. They're opening the doors." The front door creaked open, and a blast of noise flooded in shouts. Camera shutters, voices calling Julian's name. The cabin erupted in cheers again, passengers clapping, some chanting, "Carter, Carter, Carter." Rebecca shrank deeper into her seat, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses she had fished from her bag, but it was too late. Cameras would find her. The internet already had. The crew stood frozen, waiting for instructions, but none came. The silence from headquarters was its own verdict. Finally, Brooks gestured toward the aisle. "Mr. Carter, whenever you're ready." Julian rose slowly from seat 1A. The cabin hushed, every phone turning toward him. He adjusted his jacket, smoothed his shirt, and glanced around. His voice carried, soft but firm. "Thank you all for standing with me today. You didn't just witness history, you made it." Applause broke out again, louder than ever. Some passengers wiped tears from their eyes. Maya whispered, her voice trembling, "He's walking into history." Julian stepped into the aisle. As he moved forward, passengers reached out, shaking his hand, patting his shoulder, thanking him. He nodded to each, his expression humble but resolute. At the door, the glare of lights hit him full in the face. The jet bridge was lined with cameras, microphones thrust forward, reporters shouting, "Mr. Carter, Mr. Carter, can you comment?" Julian lifted a hand, his calm silencing them more effectively than security could. His voice was steady, deliberate. Today, the world saw what happens when dignity is denied. It should never take ownership, wealth, or power to earn respect. Every passenger deserves it. Every human being deserves it. The crowd erupted cheers, questions, the frantic clicking of shutters. Julian continued, "What happened on this flight is not unique. It happens in airports, in workplaces, in streets, every day. But today, it was recorded. Today, it could not be ignored. And today, it ends here, at least in this airline, which I own. Immediate reforms begin now." Gasps and cheers mixed in the jet bridge. Reporters shouted, passengers behind him clapped, and the live stream numbers soared past 3 million. Rebecca was escorted off next, flanked by officers. Phones captured her every step as passengers booed and shouted. She tried to cover her face, but it was useless. Her fall from arrogance was complete. The crew followed, their faces pale and drawn. Stephanie's tears ran unchecked. Anthony avoided every camera. Michelle kept her chin up, but her eyes betrayed her fear. James trailed behind, shoulders slumped. The world saw them too, and judgment would follow. Julian stepped into the terminal, where more cameras waited, flashing like lightning. He paused at the podium hastily assembled by the airline's PR team. For once, he didn't reject it. He placed both hands on the stand, leaned slightly forward, and spoke. "I am Julian Carter. I am the majority owner of this airline. Today, I was told I did not belong in the seat I paid for because of how I look. This is not just my story. It is the story of thousands who have been silenced, humiliated, dismissed. But it will not continue. Not under my leadership." The crowd roared, journalists raising their microphones higher. Julian's tone sharpened, his voice carrying across the terminal. "Effective immediately. The employees responsible are suspended. A full investigation will follow. But more than that, systemic change is coming. Mandatory bias training, anonymous reporting, body-worn cameras for crews, passenger advocacy offices at every hub. This isn't about one flight. This is about rewriting how dignity is protected in the skies." The cheers swelled again. Reporters fired questions, but Julian lifted his hand. "I'll have more to say in the coming days. For now, know this: dignity is not negotiable. Dignity is not for sale." The chant began again, spontaneous and powerful. Dignity, dignity, dignity. Julian stepped away from the podium, his face calm but resolute. The world was watching, and he had given them more than a headline. He had given them a movement. 6 months had passed since the flight that shook the skies. The world had not forgotten. Hashtags like dignity, not for sale, and Seat 1A still trended every few weeks, reigniting conversations about justice, accountability, and what it meant to treat people with respect. What had begun as a confrontation in a cramped cabin had grown into something far larger, a movement reshaping an entire industry. The airline, under Julian Carter's leadership, was almost unrecognizable. At every hub, glass-walled passenger advocacy offices had sprung up, staffed with trained mediators and civil rights experts. Crew members now wore discreet body-worn cameras during boarding and seating. Monthly transparency reports were published online, detailing complaints, resolutions, and corrective actions. For the first time in aviation history, passengers could see exactly how an airline held itself accountable. The numbers told the story. Discrimination complaints dropped by 83%. Customer satisfaction soared. Employee morale, once shaky, rose steadily as the culture shifted from fear and hierarchy to dignity and service. Even Wall Street had noticed after the initial dip, the stock had rebounded higher than ever, investors citing the reforms as a new model for corporate responsibility. Julian often read those reports late at night in his office, long after others had gone home. But he didn't smile at the stock charts or investor praise. His mind always went back to the cabin, to the look in Rebecca Langford's eyes, to the silence of the crew, to the cheers of passengers who had refused to look away. Numbers mattered, but the memory of that day mattered more. Rebecca's life had changed too, though not as she had imagined. She had tried to sue, claiming humiliation and emotional distress. The courts dismissed her case swiftly, pointing to the mountain of live-stream evidence showing her own words and actions. Her employer, a prestigious consulting firm, terminated her within weeks of the flight. Invitations to conferences and social clubs vanished. She became a cautionary tale, her name synonymous with entitlement. Tabloids followed her for a time, documenting her attempts to rebrand herself as a victim. But the public was not interested in her redemption arc. She faded into obscurity, a reminder that arrogance could collapse overnight. The crew's outcomes were varied. Anthony Green, the purser, was formally dismissed within days of the incident. For months, he resisted, appealing to the union, claiming he was scapegoated. But every hearing replayed the footage of his dismissive tone, his threats, his refusal to de-escalate. Eventually, he gave up. Last anyone had heard, he was managing a small diner outside Atlanta, quieter, humbler. Some said he had grown more patient with time. Others weren't sure. Stephanie Rhodes faced suspension, then mandatory retraining. Against her pride, she returned to the classroom, forced to confront her blind spots. The footage of her biting her lip, eyes filled with doubt, had been replayed across the world. 6 months later, she was back in uniform, but different. Passengers noticed her gentler manner, her willingness to listen, her ability to apologize. She carried the memory of that flight in every interaction, a private scar, but also a chance to change. Michelle Adams, the veteran flight attendant, chose retirement over reform. After 20 years, she refused to adjust, claiming the airline had bowed to politics. Her retirement party was quiet, her departure barely noted. She faded from the company like smoke, remembered more for her resistance to change than for her years of service. James Porter, the youngest of the crew, found an unexpected path. Though shaken by the incident, he embraced the training and mentorship programs Julian implemented. 6 months later, he was promoted to a lead role on domestic routes, praised for his calm under pressure and willingness to learn. "You can't control where you start," he told a training group one afternoon, "but you can control who you choose to be when the world is watching." And Maya Thompson, the teenage live streamer whose trembling hands had carried the truth to millions, had become a voice of her generation. Her following exploded. She was invited to speak at youth conferences, colleges, even on national news. She didn't claim to be a hero. She always said the same thing: "I just pressed record. He's the one who carried the weight." Still, her courage had mattered. She had made sure the world saw. Julian's reforms extended far beyond the airline. Other carriers, at first defensive, soon faced their own viral moments as passengers demanded accountability. Within months, competing airlines adopted similar policies: transparent reporting, bias training, passenger advocacy. Airports signed agreements to overhaul complaint systems. The FAA announced new guidelines, citing the Carter Protocol as a model. It was, as one journalist put it, the Rosa Parks moment of the skies. And yet, for Julian, the true measure of success was not in headlines or applause, it was in quieter moments. One evening, his daughter climbed into his lap, holding a crayon drawing. It showed a stick figure standing tall in front of a crowd, the words, "My dad is brave," scribbled in purple letters. Julian felt his throat tighten. All the boardroom battles, all the reforms, all the viral chaos, it all distilled into this: a little girl, proud of her father. But not all was triumphant. With reform came resistance. Some crew members bristled at the new accountability measures. Unions argued over body cameras, claiming invasion of privacy. Politicians accused Julian of grandstanding for social clout. He bore it all, steady as ever, knowing change never came without friction. He often thought back to his father's words, "Power is how steady you remain when others lose control." 6 months later, those words guided him still. At a press conference commemorating the anniversary of the incident, Julian stood at a podium flanked by passenger advocates, civil rights leaders, and fellow executives. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. "This movement was not about me," he said plainly. "It was about us, about every traveler who deserves dignity, about every employee who deserves training, support, and accountability, about every child who should grow up believing that respect is not something you buy, but something you are owed as a human being." The applause was steady, strong, heartfelt. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. 6 months ago, one woman tried to take a seat from me. What she didn't know is that the seat wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who has ever been told they didn't belong. And I intend to make sure they always have a place. The room erupted, journalists shouting, cameras clicking. And as Julian stepped back from the podium, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. Movements didn't end. They grew. They spread. They demanded. The cabin of that flight was long behind him, but the echo of its lessons carried forward, reshaping skies, boardrooms, and hearts. 6 months later, the world was different, and it would never go back. 1 year after the flight that changed everything, the world looked different. Not perfect, not free of bias, but undeniably changed. The movement that began in a single row of first class had rippled outward, across boardrooms, across governments, across cultures. Airports now displayed large digital signs near security checkpoints. "Dignity is not for sale." Passenger rights bill. Passengers could scan QR codes to access real-time complaint dashboards, seeing how airlines handled bias claims. Boarding areas included posters that reminded travelers every passenger belongs. Respect is non-negotiable. Julian Carter had become both a symbol and a steward, though he never sought celebrity. His calm defiance and steady leadership made him a global figure. University classes studied his words. Activists quoted him on protest banners. Headlines dubbed him the man in 1A. And yet, in his private life, he remained the same man who loved quiet mornings with his daughter, who read her bedtime stories about astronauts and explorers, who brewed his coffee slowly while sunlight spilled across the kitchen. Fame hadn't changed him. It had only magnified his responsibility. The airline thrived under the Carter Protocol. Employee surveys showed record satisfaction. Crew members spoke openly about accountability, making them feel safer, not threatened. Passengers, once skeptical, now praised the transparency. Other industries had begun adopting similar reforms: hotels, rideshare companies, even hospitals. The ripple had become a tide. Rebecca Langford's story had taken its inevitable course. Her name still trended occasionally, but only as a cautionary meme clips of her shouting, "I'm Diamond Elite," paired with sarcastic captions. She lived quietly now in a smaller city, her career in ruins, her reputation beyond repair. She had become a shadow in the background of a story much larger than her. Anthony Green, once purser, still ran his diner outside Atlanta. Some locals said he seemed humbler, slower to anger. He avoided cameras, but occasionally spoke to young employees about patience, about humility, whether it was redemption or just survival. No one knew. Stephanie Rhodes continued her career, transformed. She now trained new recruits, beginning every class with the words, "Respect is your first duty." Some saw her as a hypocrite redeemed. Others saw her as proof that even scars could teach. She carried both identities, determined to never forget. James Porter flourished, leading his own crew with compassion and fairness. He never bragged, but his colleagues knew he had been there on Flight 447. They saw the way he stepped into conflicts calmly, always mindful that someone was watching, that every moment mattered. Maya Thompson, once just a teenager with a phone, was now a first-year university student studying journalism. Her viral live stream had become an origin story she didn't flaunt but couldn't escape. She often told classmates, "I wasn't brave, I was just present. He was brave, I just pressed record." Still, she had inspired a generation of young people to believe their voices mattered. 1 year later, the memory of that flight still burned bright in public consciousness. But for Julian, it was not about fame or recognition. It was about legacy. On the anniversary of the incident, the airline hosted a public forum at its largest hub. Hundreds gathered in person. Thousands tuned in online. A stage had been erected beneath a giant banner that read, "1 year of dignity." Julian stepped to the podium, the crowd rising in applause. He wore no tie, just a simple dark suit, his demeanor steady. He began softly. 1 year ago, a seat was challenged, but it was never about the seat. It was about dignity. And today, 1 year later, I stand not as a man who won an argument, but as a man who witnessed a movement. The crowd clapped, steady and respectful. He continued, "In the last 12 months, we've seen complaints drop, respect rise, and accountability finally take its place in the skies. But beyond numbers, we've seen something greater. We've seen everyday people realize their voices matter. We've seen truth outrun lies. We've seen passengers stand for one another." He paused, his eyes softening. "And we've seen children watch. My daughter was one of them. She saw her father stay calm, stay steady, and remind the world that dignity is not for sale. That is what I want for her. That is what I want for all of our children to grow up knowing respect is not earned by status or wealth. It is theirs by birthright." The audience rose in ovation, some shouting his name, others chanting the mantra that had become a rallying cry. Dignity, dignity, dignity. Julian waited, his expression calm, his breathing steady. When the cheers softened, he added, "But let me be clear, the work is not finished. Bias doesn't vanish overnight. Prejudice doesn't disappear because of policies. What matters is vigilance, courage, and the will to stand firm when others would rather look away." He leaned forward slightly. "That's why I ask you all, don't just remember this story. Live it. When you see disrespect, confront it. When you see silence, break it. When you see injustice, record it. Because dignity must be defended every day, in every seat, in every space." The applause came again, louder, longer, carrying across the terminal like a wave. Julian stepped back from the podium. His daughter, now older by a year, ran to him from the wings of the stage, hugging his legs tightly. He lifted her into his arms, the crowd cheering louder at the sight. She whispered into his ear, "You're still my hero." His eyes stung, but he smiled. "No, sweetheart, you're mine." The cameras flashed, the chant echoed, and the world leaned in once more. But for Julian, the story had always been personal. 1 year later, he had carried the weight with patience, with strength, with dignity. And as he walked off the stage, hand in hand with his daughter, he knew the skies would never be the same again. 1 year later, the echo of that flight still lingers, not in the roar of engines, but in the way people now demand respect in every seat, every aisle, every gate. Julian Carter's stand proved something the world should have never forgotten. Dignity is not a luxury, not a perk, not a privilege. It is a right. We saw arrogance collapse. We saw silence break. We saw how one man's patience could ripple outward to change an entire system. But beyond policies, beyond reforms, the heart of this story lies in something simple, the way we choose to see one another. Rebecca's downfall, the crew's lessons, Maya's courage, all of it reminds us that every action carries weight, every moment can become history. And while this story closes, the question it leaves behind is for all of us when dignity is denied before your eyes. Will you remain silent, or will you stand if this story moved you? Share it. If it stirred anger, talk about it. If it inspired hope, hold on to it. Because the skies and the world become more just only when we demand it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More stories of truth, justice, and dignity are coming.